All right, John, Iran denies that it attempts to launch satellites have anything to do with working on intercontinental ballistic missile technology that could be used to deliver a nuclear warhead. Tehran is saying this is all purely for peaceful purposes. Do you buy that?
Not really. I mean, what does Iran need with a satellite? I mean, they don't have worldwide communications. I mean, maybe they need it for intelligence gathering. But basically, this is just a fig leaf to cover up testing for their ballistic missile program. Now, here's a little bit of trivia. Most people don't know this, Michelle, but to develop the technology to deliver a nuclear warhead via a ballistic system took longer and was more costly than to develop nuclear weapons, crude nuclear, fission-based nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons, we developed those in the 40s by the end of World War II. But it took us really into the 60s and 70s before ballistic missiles were able to be fielded with reliability. And it took enormous resources by both us and the Soviet Union to do that. And it took a lot of testing. And it doesn't, like the Iranians don't have the type of resource to do that. So they're really in the technologically in the 1940s or 1950s with their ballistic missiles.
John, there's also been speculation that it's not an accident that these launches keep failing. It's believed that the CIA and the Mossad have long been conducting sabotage programs, including slipping faulty materials into Iran's aerospace supply chains. What do you make of that, and how exactly would these sabotage operations work?
Well, these sabotage operations, and they're run by several countries, are designed to drive up the cost and difficulty and time involved for Iran to develop these types of dangerous technologies, to make it harder, more costly, and to delay it. And these attacks come along a number of different ways. Sometimes they're killings of Iranian personnel. Predominantly, however, they're cyber attacks and intrusions into Iranian computer systems, as well as disrupting cash and making life just generally more difficult and expensive for Iran to pursue this.
All right, well, in the meantime, Iran's economy is struggling. The infrastructure in the country is completely collapsing, and yet the regime is allocating resources to the space program, and that requires, I imagine, some kind of spin to the Iranian people. They're frustrated with the regime on a number of matters. We saw those protests a couple of weeks ago. They seem to have died down. Where do things stand with regards to those protests? Has the regime managed to squash them mostly?
Well, they've managed to slow them down. The underlying problems are still there. The Iranian regime economy is still in tatters. Eventually, there'll be some other flashpoint, or as it was with the price hike of gasoline in Iran, which triggered problems. There'll be something else. Just because it's tamped down here for a few weeks doesn't mean that the underlying fundamentals have changed.
Right, and tamped down again with the use of force, as we saw in the previous round of protests. John, very quickly, the U.S., meanwhile, has signaled to Iraq that it will extend sanction waivers, enabling Iraq to continue importing gas from Iran. What does that signal? Why make that move?
Well, basically, the United States doesn't want to make Iran more popular in Iraqi eyes, or to stir up Iraqi sentiment against the United States, and to immediately do something which would result in turning off lights and heat inside Iraq would only strengthen the Iranians' hand. It would make the U.S. Less popular and give the Iranians something they could point to, saying, hey, we're the ones that are looking out for you, not the U.S. These sanctions waivers are only 3 months long, and in there is extracted a commitment by Iraq to develop their own indigenous sources of power. And these can be renewed or not renewed every 90 days. But I think in the interim, it's a smart move.
All right.